Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got my review for you finally of the Spyderco Peter Rassenti collaboration Nirvana. So the Nirvana was one of Spyderco's most hotly anticipated knives for a long time because it's Spyderco's first integral. It's a a production version of a really popular custom knife by Peter Rassenti, and it's one of Spyderco's most ambitious projects in a long, long time. And so a lot of people, rightfully, were looking forward to this guy. And so I had pre-ordered one, but it actually turned out that I was able to pick one up used before the pre-order shipped. So, beautiful. And that's where I'm at here. So, size comparison. Here is your Spyderco Delica, your Spyderco Paramilitary 2 here. Let's see, Spyderco Sleesh Bowie is a knife I'm going to be comparing this guy to a whole lot during the course of this review. Your Jake Hoback Wyback. Yeah, I got a review of this guy coming up before too long. Beautiful viewer sent it along. And, your Ontario Rat number 1. Why not, right? There we go. So, we can see this is not a small knife by any stretch, but, at the same time, it's not so overly huge. Let's go on ahead and do the usual and jump on into the good, the bad, and the ugly of this particular hotly anticipated pocket knife. Okay, so first off, one of the most interesting things about this knife is the integral handle. You can see here that the handle is made not out of many chunks of titanium, like for instance on your Sleesh Bowie here, where there are multiple pieces, but this is made out of a single milled out portion of titanium, which is really neat, honestly. I'm a big fan of that. It's nice and it's kind of cool. There aren't that many integral production knives out there. There are a couple from CKF, and Rayot's going to do one here soon, but they're not that common, and so that's neat in and of itself. The other neat thing about it is it leads to very simple construction, because this is a blade that's only got a few parts. You've got a scale, you've got a clip, you've got a blade, and then you've got your bearings on the inside there. That's really it. And so that means that this assembly in construction is very, very easy once you deal with the red Loctite on the pivot. Watch my disassembly video for more about that. Speaking of the scales and the handle, I do like this lined finish. It looks gimmicky at first. If you see it in pictures, it's just like, oh, light line stuff. But there is actually enough of a polish on the inside of those that it almost feels like faceting. And so it plays with the light in a fun way. I appreciate that a lot. Another little detail that I noticed that I didn't actually know about when I posted my first video is the inserted stop pin. So inside this knife here, hopefully you can see it, there is a stop pin right inside here. And that pin is what locks the knife shut, what prevents it from going further in this direction, and also what keeps the blade from falling against the inside of the integral. That's a beautiful thing. It's a necessary thing. How they did it is more interesting still. I initially said they milled it out, but no, they actually pressed it in, and I've got some little evidence of that. I'm going to use my, this is a G10 Spyderco Dragonfly here. I'm going to use it to try and point it out. It's really, really subtle here. So, let me find it right here. I'm hoping you can see this. There is a little crescent of trying to draw the kind of contour of it. But basically, they drilled out a hole in the integral handle and then pushed in a pin. And so you can see the little edge of the pin right there. It's just barely visible to the eye. Like with the loop, it's barely visible. And so I don't know if I'm going to catch it on camera here, but by God, I tried. And it's kind of neat. It's a nice approach, and it works obviously nicely. The details on this knife are by and large all there. The spine of the blade is cool. You've got a nice, it's not just a flat out swedge where it comes up to a point, because that gets sharp. This is in fact angle, flat, angle. And that's neat. It makes it a lot more easy to carry and use and hold in the hand. It doesn't feel as sharp or pointy as some swedges tend to do. And so I like that. Also, the angle of the jimping here, the fact that the jimping kind of disappears down this way is nice. It's nicely done. Another detail that I've noticed is that the lines that are wrapping around this guy actually do connect. So you can see here that at all points, this line connects back to that line. And similarly here, this line connects across. And that means that they looked at this as a 3D machined object rather than as a, front, back, whatever sort of affair. That's nice. The milling on the inside of this knife is particularly clean. I'm going to hope that you can see this, but basically on the inside of the knife, it is very smooth, very simple. There's not a lot of burr. There's not a whole lot of really anything going on. Let me see if I can get a flashlight in there to show off a little bit better what's going on. There we go, I hope. Yeah, I'll turn this down slightly. Perfect. Yeah, so you can see here that there's not a whole lot going on inside this knife, which makes this very easy to clean out. All you really need to do is wash it out. Oh, and there's a really good view of your stop pin down there. So, beautiful. So I appreciate the cleanliness of the milling done inside there. That's a nice detail. And then finally, there are no sharp edges on this knife. The Spidey hole is in great... none of the edges except the blade, obviously, are excessively sharp. So this was well done at Tai Chung there. A couple of other good things. This is a hugely ambitious knife. Not only are they trying to create a production version of a hugely popular custom knife, but they're also doing an integral, and integrals are not common in production. And it's just it's a hell of a stretch for Spyderco to do. They've done some great knives before, but wow, this was crazy. And for the most part, they did it, and that's kind of impressive. This knife carries very, very nicely. You can see that the clip gives it a nice cant here. Because it's an integral, the side of this is very smooth, so your hand, as you go into the pocket, glides right by it. I really like carrying this knife, because it's a lot of knife in a fairly small package, and a fairly thin package. Very few knives are as thin in feeling in the pocket as this guy was. This is an absolute joy and pleasure to carry in a way that a lot of big knives just aren't. So I like that a lot. And then finally, the thing that blows me away most about this knife is the solidity of the knife. Once you pop this guy open, because of the integral construction, and because of the solid lock bar, listen to this. Oh yeah, that's nice. The knife feels like a fixed blade once it's popped open, and that's a really nice feeling. This is the most secure knife I'm aware of. Absolutely cool. Big, big fan of that. So, pardon me. There's your good. It's got this integral handle, which is hugely ambitious, makes the knife very, very easy to disassemble. The line finish is pretty neat, the stop pin is neat, the details are all there, and it carries just wonderfully in the pocket, and once you pop it open, it's like you got a fixed blade. So there you go. That's the good. Let's jump into the bad, because sadly there's some bad here. So on your bad side, first off, the clip to me is very boring. It's just not it's nothing too interesting. It's a boring Spyderco regular clip. It looks, I think, identical to the one in the paramilitary too, except they put an acid stonewash on there, which is unfortunate, because that acid stonewash shows wear really easily. It does mean that you can replace this with an aftermarket sort of clip, but still. Not a huge fan of the clip, especially on a knife that was otherwise really ambitious, to then just throw, and we'll put a clip on there. It leaves me a little cold. There is huge potential for snail trails on this knife, both on the clip, on the acid stonewash titanium, and frankly on the blade itself. You can see the blade here has some wear already from just using it casually. This working finish, and I'll come back to the finish later, just shows a lot of wear, and I'm not a big fan of that. It's a very big knife, maybe a little bit too big in my opinion. The blade... I just don't get why this isn't a 3.5-inch knife. It doesn't seem to be compelling. And honestly, I think this would be a much more interesting knife at the slightly smaller size. But right now, that's the fashion. Okay, whatever. This knife is heavy. It's not so incredibly heavy, but it is heavy. You're looking at 4.8 ounces, which is heavier than, say, a Slish Bowie, which is at 4.3, or certainly than your PM2, which is at 3.9. It's not terrible, but it feels very dense in the hand because you have a lot. The knife is very compact. Everything kind of folds into a smaller package. That's why it carries so well, but it is very dense. It's kind of deceptively... It feels like it's a lot heavier than it is because of that. Another issue, when I got this guy, the detent was overly strong. And it took a long time of flipping it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, for me to get the detent to a place where I was content with it. And so that's something you do have to keep in mind. Out of the box, it may be a little stronger than you'd like. And then the ergonomics on this guy are Not great. They're not terrible either. They're probably about dead neutral for the knife world, but Spyderco is usually known for ergonomics, and this one doesn't do it for me. Maybe it's my smaller hands working here, but if I grip the knife in this grip, I've got some hot spots coming off of these two veins coming up here. And if I grip further back, all I've got is the clip going on, hot spot-wise, but I'm way far away from the blade. So I'm not a big fan of the ergonomics on this knife, particularly. Finally, my biggest complaint about this knife is that it is a very poor slicer because the blade stock is incredibly, absolutely thick. It is really, really thick. If I take a little measurement here, we are looking at a whole bunch. We're looking at about 4 millimeters thick here, which is, frankly, a lot. And that's amplified by the fact that they made it a saber grind. They didn't do a full flat grind like on the PM2, and so you're really getting the full length in only this distance. So I sat there and I made a salad with this guy, and sure, it worked, but wedging carrots apart it felt like I was using a freaking hatchet. And not every knife needs to be a good slicer, certainly, but I don't know. For me, at least, that's kind of a problem. This blade is way thicker than it needs to be, and it lends the whole knife a little bit of a blade-heavy feeling, both visually and otherwise. This knife blade would have been much better suited to a thinner size. So, there you go. That's your bad. The clip is boring. There's a lot of potential for snail trails and wear on this knife. It's a little big. It feels a little heavy. The ergos are just not incredible, and the blade stock is just way too thick for what they're trying to do here. Let's go into the ugly, because sadly there's some ugly here. So on your ugly front, first off, I want to point out that this is a $430 knife that carries a basic Spyderco warranty, and the Spyderco warranty is fine. They tend to stand behind it most of the time, but they have clauses in there like if you disassemble your knife, the warranty is void, and that's really ugly, especially on a knife that's running on bearings, that's meant, and I will get there, that is in some ways meant for a hard use. You do need to disassemble the knife regularly. And so that's really ugly, and people say, well, yeah, but I disassembled mine, and I sent it in a Spyderco, and they took care of it, so, it should be fine. But the thing is, if you're paying $430, your warranty had better be more than it should be fine. They also don't do things like blade replacement that some of your other high-end companies or even some of your low-end companies are doing now. And so I feel like, sure, on a $40 Tenacious, the warranty is fine. But if you're asking $430, they kind of need to step up to the plate a little bit more. I wouldn't actually mind seeing Spyderco break out their knives into kind of a lower-end division and a higher-end division, and give the higher-end division a really great warranty policy, more along the lines of what ZT or Chris Reeve have going on. So that's something you got to keep in mind. There you go. Second issue here is that the lock bar tension on this guy can't actually be adjusted. With most frame locks, if you, say, overextend the lock bar, and there's not an over travel stop here, you can take the knife apart and then bend the lock bar back in this direction and bend it past where it would normally go, and that'll reset the tension. On an integral knife, you don't have that option, and so you're forced using that Spyderco warranty if there's any kind of an issue like that. You can always loosen it, but you can never get it back, and that's just not great. So lock bar tension adjustment is a little strange, and that's just a fact of life with an integral. Another issue is the blade finish on this guy. I really dislike the finish of this blade. It's kind of an acid wash, maybe working finish. Could be a little blasted, I'm not sure. But whatever the heck it is, I don't like it for a couple of reasons. First off, it makes the entire knife one uniform gray mass. I think that's not very interesting. Compare it to, say, the Sleesh Bowie, where you've got a beautiful contrast between the handle and the blade. Here it's just like, it's gray. And it's boring, and there's just not a whole lot to it. So I'm not a big fan of that blade finish. Second off, it's very good at showing grime. Little dots of liquid, whatever, will stay on this guy. If you cut into tape, it's very visible on this finish. And also, it's not that protective. S90V is stainless, but that just means it stains less. If you are in a situation where you're working with salt water or something like that, this finish has a lot of porosity to it, and it makes it very easy for, things to attack the blade in a way that a more polished finish doesn't. So, all over, this blade finish doesn't make sense. Oh, and also it shows wear very readily. If you clean the knife off with something abrasive, or you're cutting into something abrasive with the knife, it shows wear. I mean, even in my time carrying the knife, and given it was used too, there is visible wear on the blade here. Some areas the acid wash is stronger than in others. And so I really hate this blade finish. I wish that they had done something like the mirror stonewash on your Sleesh Bowie, or hell, even just a natural finish like on your PM2. I think it would have been a much more compelling knife as a result. So there's that. A really ugly thing with this knife was the lock stick. Even still, there's a little bit of it on there, but you can see I've got the entire tang of this blade coated in Sharpie ink, and same thing with the lock bar there. This is very, very prone to lock stick. This is incredibly lock sticky. When I got this out of the box, it was unacceptably lock sticky, to the extent where if you really slammed it open, you would have to use some kind of a tool to get in there and pop the lock. That was really ugly. Yeah, it's gonna wear in, yeah, with enough time, but still, come on, Spyderco. This is a $430 knife that needed to be addressed a little bit better. Carbonize something to deal with that issue. Like I said, now with enough sessions of sharpieing, not just once, but it's back to a better point, but I'm just not a fan of it, and there's still, you can still hear the lock stick going on there. That's ugly, and I wish they would have done some kind of an insert. I wish they would have done something to address that issue. And then finally, that brings us to the last issue, which is the price. Now look, I'm not calling this price unfair. This must have been a royal pain in the neck to manufacture. But the price is very high at $430. And it's $430, as I've said, for a Spyderco warranty. It's $430 for a knife with considerable lock stick. And it's $430 for a knife with a really lazy blade finish. And so, you know, if you love this design, buy it at $430. You're going to love it. But that's a lot of money to spend on this knife. And I'm not 100% convinced that this is really the best value in this area. If you want a Rassenti Nirvana, this is the best way to get one, no doubt. But I'm just not convinced that that's a great value in the grand scheme of the greater knife market, because $430 buys you a lot of knife. So, there you go. That's the ugly. The warranty is okay. The blade finish ain't great. The lock bar tension can't be adjusted. There's crazy lock stick on this guy out of the box. And the price is not so stellar in the grand scheme of the knife world, although you're not getting ripped off terribly either. Let's go into the final conclusion here. So this knife took me a long time to get a handle on it. I would carry it one day and just be in love with it. I would carry it the next day and just not get it. And I just couldn't figure out why. And so I carried it, and I carried it, and I carried it, and I used it, and I used it until suddenly it dawned on me. I have a love-hate relationship with this knife. I love this half of this knife. I hate this half of this knife. Everything over here, by and large, makes a lot of sense. Everything over here doesn't make all that much sense. It's really, really strange, and let me explain. This blade is really kind of a hard-use sort of blade, in that it's got a very, frankly, overly thick blade stock. It's got a saber grind to it. It's got this weird working finish. I mean, this is a blade that belongs in a really hardcore sort of knife. But the thing is, although S90V isn't really the best choice for hard use anyways, I would have liked the C3V if that was really what they were going for. S90V can be a little chippy and maybe a little rusty, especially with this finish. Anyways, moving along. But this half of it is very much not a hard use knife. This is on bearings. So if you get any gunk up inside there, the bearings are going to clog up, and that's no good. And it's also, I mean, yeah, it locks up beautifully and securely, but it doesn't make sense to put this blade with this body, both aesthetically and frankly otherwise. And it makes the knife very bladey, in a very weird way. And so I just don't get what they were going for here. This knife, in my opinion, would be much, much more compelling with a nice blade, more similar to the Sleesh Bowie, even if you kept the shape of the blade the same, but you managed to put a better finish on it. You used a full flat grind on it. You used some thinner blade stock, because, oh my God, this blade stock is way too thick. That would be incredibly compelling. But instead they did this, and I just don't get it. I think this knife is best summed up by one of my Instagram viewers, Misanthropia. Said maybe they called it the Nirvana because you have to be enlightened to figure out who it's for. That's pretty cute, right? But it kind of sums it up. I don't know who's going to buy this blade. this half of it is finished and priced like a safe queen. This half of it is finished and priced like a beater. And the two of them combined don't make a whole lot of sense. So a couple of conclusions I can really easily make, though, is that this is by far Spyderco's most ambitious knife. They aimed really high here. Copy in production a custom knife, and they did really well. I mean, they aimed high and they landed high. But, the milling here, the handle on this is just incredible. But they didn't quite hit the mark. I don't think they quite got where they needed to go with this. They've got the lock stick issue. They've got the weird blade issue going on here that just doesn't make any sense to me. They've got the clip. I mean, they aimed really high, but they did miss. And that's a little bit, honestly, sad. Even if it cost $500 to do this really right, I wish that they had done it really right. And that they hadn't cut corners on the lock stick, and that they'd given a better clip, and maybe, ideally, give a blade that could slice worth a damn, just saying. So, yeah, it's ambitious, but I think at some level it might have gotten away from them, given the price point. It's also Spyderco's flagship knife at this point, I think. It's their most expensive, their most complicated in some ways, at least machining-wise, and one of their most, it's their halo product. But it's definitely, I don't think, it's not their most well-made knife. For me, that probably goes to the Spyderco Rubicon, which is a great knife, but, and it's not perhaps as practical for EDC, but it's incredibly well-finished. It's incredibly well-made. It's a tour de force of knife-making. And it's certainly not Spyderco's best knife. For me, that still goes to the Sleesh Bowie, which it's doing fewer things. It's less ambitious, but everything that it's doing damn near perfectly. And it's not just that some of the details are there, all of them are. And so at the end of the day, the Spyderco Nirvana is an incredible knife, and it's an interesting watershed moment for Spyderco. This is one of the coolest things Spyderco has ever done, and even the fact that they missed the mark a little bit doesn't diminish that. I think this is going to be an incredible collector piece someday, because I don't see this having a huge run. Because, again, I don't necessarily know exactly who this is for. But, in the grand scheme of things, should I buy a pocket knife? Should I buy this guy? I don't really see it, to be honest with you. If you love it, do it. You'll probably love it. But there are enough strangenesses to this knife that I think this may be better considered a part of history than a part of your EDC. Some people are going to disagree. It's still one hell of a knife, no doubt about that. But I guess I don't get it. Maybe it's not mine to get. Need enlightenment first. But, yeah, so that's your Spyderco Nirvana. I hope this has been interesting, and it is still one heck of a show. And, I mean, well done, Spyderco. And he is hoping that Nirvana Round 2, or the next integral they put out, is going to be even better than this. So, I hope this was interesting to you, that you have yourself a wonderful rest of the day, and that if it is within your ability, that you reach enlightenment soon.